The morning alarm on Nexus Prime Military Academy sounded like thunder across the metal corridors. Cadet Park Ji-won rolled out of his narrow bunk and winced as his feet hit the cold floor. Around him, alien cadets were already moving with the smooth efficiency that came naturally to their species. The Krillian cadet in the next bay stretched his massive frame and flexed natural armor plates that covered his back and shoulders like living metal. His name was Mordek, and he stood nearly 8 feet tall with muscles that could crush steel. When he walked, the floor vibrated slightly under his weight. Across the dormitory, a Vexery cadet named Thexal was already dressed and checking his equipment. The Vexery were built for speed, with long limbs and enhanced nervous systems that let them react faster than any other known species. Thexal could move so quickly that sometimes he seemed to blur. Park Ji-won pulled on his standard-issue uniform and tried not to think about how small he looked compared to his roommates. At 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing only 160 pounds, he was considered average size for a human. In this academy, average meant weak. The mess hall was a massive space designed to accommodate 12 different species. Long tables stretched across the room, each one adjusted for different body types and dietary needs. Park Ji-won grabbed a tray and loaded it with the protein paste and vitamin supplements that passed for human food in space. He found his usual spot at a table near the back, where 2 other human cadets were already eating. Kim Tae-yun looked up and nodded as Ji-won sat down. Tae-yun was slightly taller than Ji-won, but even thinner, with the pale complexion of someone who had spent most of his life working with computers rather than physical training. The third human at their table was Lee So-min, their squad leader. She had short black hair and alert eyes that constantly scanned the room, taking in details that others might miss. She was the best tactical student among the humans, but even her scores were only average compared to the enhanced mental abilities of species like the Thornery. Sleep well? Tae-yun asked quietly as he stirred his food. As well as anyone can with Mordek practicing his war cries at 5 in the morning, Ji-won replied. From across the mess hall, they could hear laughter from a table of Vexery cadets. Thexal was standing up, apparently telling a story while making exaggerated gestures. Every few seconds, his audience would burst into the high-pitched chittering sound that passed for Vexery laughter. What do you think that's about? So-min asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. They didn't have to wonder long. Thexal's voice carried clearly across the room as he switched to standard galactic language so that everyone could understand. And then the human cadet asked for a rest break after only 3 hours of combat simulation. Thexal announced. 3 hours. My people can fight for 3 days without stopping. More laughter erupted from the alien tables. A Thornery cadet with purple skin and large black eyes added his own comment. At least they didn't ask for 8 hours of unconsciousness like they do every night, the Thornery said. My species only needs 2 hours of meditation per day cycle. Humans waste a third of their lives being completely helpless. The Krillian table joined in with their own observations. These were delivered in the deep, rumbling voices that made everything they said sound like a threat. Human bones break if you hit them too hard, one of the Krillian said. Their skin tears easily. They cannot even breathe properly in thin atmosphere without mechanical assistance. Park Ji-won felt his face getting hot, but he kept eating. Getting angry would only prove their point about human emotional instability. Beside him, Tae-yun's jaw was clenched tight, and So-min's knuckles were white where she gripped her eating utensil. The worst part was that most of what the alien said was technically true. Humans did need more sleep than most species. They were physically weaker than Krillians, slower than Vexery, and less mentally gifted than Thornery. In every measurable category that the Academy used to evaluate cadets, humans ranked near the bottom. Maybe we should just ignore them, Tae-yun suggested quietly. Hard to ignore when they're right, Ji-won replied. So-min looked at both of them with a slight frown. They're not right about everything. Name one thing humans do better than any of these species, Ji-won challenged. So-min was quiet for a moment, thinking. Around them, the alien cadets continued their casual discussion of human inadequacies. The conversation had moved on to human nutritional requirements and how much resources they consumed compared to their military value. Problem solving, Soman finally said. Humans are good at finding solutions when the obvious approaches don't work. The Thornery have enhanced brains and psychic abilities, Taeyeon pointed out. They can process information faster than we can even think it. That's not the same thing, Soman insisted. They're good at analyzing data and making logical connections. But when something completely unexpected happens, humans adapt faster. Ji-won wanted to believe her, but the evidence was hard to ignore. In every training exercise, the human cadets consistently ranked in the bottom quarter of their class. They couldn't match Krillion's strength in combat simulations. They couldn't keep up with Vexry speed in tactical maneuvers. They couldn't compete with Thornery. Intelligence and strategic planning. The morning briefing was held in the Academy's main auditorium, a space large enough to hold 3,000 cadets from all species. Commander Veltar of the Thornery took the stage, his purple skin gleaming under the bright lights. Like all members of his species, he had an enlarged cranium to accommodate his enhanced brain, and his large black eyes could see patterns and connections that other species missed. Today we begin advanced combat simulations, Commander Veltar announced. His voice carried easily through the auditorium without any artificial amplification. These exercises will test your ability to work under pressure, make rapid decisions, and coordinate with teammates of different species. He gestured toward the holographic display that showed the Academy's training facilities. You will be divided into mixed species squads and given scenarios based on real military operations. Your performance will be evaluated on speed, efficiency, and tactical effectiveness. Park Ji-won felt his stomach drop. Mixed species squads meant that he and his fellow humans would be separated and paired with alien cadets, who had already made their opinions about human capabilities very clear. Squad assignments will be posted after this briefing, Commander Veltar continued. Training begins at 1400 hours. I expect all cadets to demonstrate the warrior spirit that brought them to this academy. As the cadets filed out of the auditorium, Park Ji-won overheard more comments from the alien students. I hope I don't get stuck with a human, one Vexry muttered to his friend. They slow down the whole squad? At least humans can operate the basic equipment, Akrillian replied. That's something, I suppose. They're adequate for support roles, added a Thornery. Communications, maintenance, supply management. Nothing that requires real warrior skills. Park Ji-won found himself walking alongside Mordek, the massive Krillian from his dormitory. Up close, Mordek's natural armor plating was even more impressive. It looked like someone had built him from metal and stone rather than flesh and bone. Humans work hard, Mordek said in his deep voice. It might have been meant as a compliment, but his tone suggested he was talking about draft animals rather than fellow soldiers. We do our best, Ji-won replied carefully. Your best is not the same as our best, Mordek stated matter-of-factly. But you try? That counts for something? Later that day, Park Ji-won stood in the equipment bay preparing for his first advanced combat simulation. His squad consisted of himself, a Vexry communications specialist, a Thornery tactical coordinator, and a Krillian heavy weapons expert. On paper, it should have been a perfectly balanced team. In reality, he felt like the weak link that would drag everyone else down. The simulation arena was a massive space filled with obstacles, targets, and holographic enemies. Their mission was simple in concept but difficult in execution: infiltrate an enemy facility, retrieve classified data, and escape without being detected. As they moved through the starting position, Park Ji-won could see his teammates adapting their strategies to account for his limitations. The Vexry slowed his natural pace. The Thornery simplified his tactical instructions. The Krillian positioned himself to provide extra protection. They were accommodating his weakness, and everyone knew it. The simulation began, and immediately Park Ji-won felt the gap between himself and his teammates. While they moved with supernatural grace and precision, He stumbled over obstacles and struggled to keep up with their enhanced abilities, but something strange happened as the exercise progressed. When their original plan failed and they needed to improvise, Park Ji-won found himself thinking of solutions that his teammates hadn't considered. When the Thornery's logical analysis reached a dead end, Ji-won suggested an approach that seemed illogical but somehow worked out. By the end of the simulation, they had completed their mission successfully. Not with the highest score in the class, but respectably enough. As they left the arena, the Vexery teammate made what might have been his first neutral comment about working with a human. "You think differently than we do," he said to Park Ji-won. Sometimes that is useful. It wasn't praise, exactly, but it wasn't mockery either. For Park Ji-won, that felt like progress. That night, as he lay in his bunk listening to the sounds of alien cadets settling in for their various forms of rest, Park Ji-won thought about what Soman had said earlier. Maybe humans really were different. Maybe being weaker and slower and more fragile wasn't the whole story. He just hoped he would get the chance to prove it before the Academy decided that humans didn't belong among the warriors of the galaxy. 3 months had passed since Park Ji-won first walked into the combat simulation arena feeling like the weakest member of his squad. The daily routine at Nexus Prime Academy had become familiar, even if it never became easy. Wake up to thunderous alarms, struggle through physical training while alien cadets moved with natural grace, sit through tactical lectures where examples of human limitations were used to illustrate important points about species capabilities. On this particular morning, Park Ji-won was in the engineering workshop trying to improve the power efficiency of a standard combat suit. The work was detailed and required patience, two qualities that humans seem to possess in greater measure than most alien species. His hands moved carefully over the delicate circuits while his mind focused on the problem. Kim Tae-yeon sat at a nearby workstation, practicing communication protocols on the Academy's advanced systems. His thin fingers danced across holographic controls as he routed signals through multiple relay points. The Thornery instructors had admitted that humans showed unusual persistence in maintaining communication links under difficult conditions. Though they attributed this to stubbornness rather than skill, Lee So-min was studying tactical displays in the corner of the workshop, her dark eyes moving rapidly as she analyzed different battle scenarios. She had been spending extra hours on strategic planning ever since Commander Veltar had mentioned that humans sometimes found creative solutions to impossible problems. She wanted to understand what made human thinking different from the logical approaches favored by other species. The peaceful atmosphere of focused work was shattered when every communication device in the Academy began broadcasting an emergency signal. The sound was sharp and urgent, designed to cut through any other noise and demand immediate attention. All three humans looked up from their work as the workshop's main display screen activated. Automatically, Commander Veltar's purple face appeared on the screen, his large black eyes reflecting the serious nature of whatever message he was about to deliver. Behind him, they could see other instructors from different species moving quickly between control stations. "All cadets report to the main auditorium immediately," Commander Veltar announced. "This is not a drill. We have received a priority distress signal that requires immediate Academy response." Park Ji-won, Kim Tae-yeon, and Lee So-min exchanged glances. In their 3 months at the Academy, they had never seen the instructors look genuinely worried. Training exercises were designed to be challenging, but they were always controlled situations, with known outcomes. This felt different. They joined the stream of cadets moving through the corridors toward the auditorium. Alien students that normally walked with confident swagger now moved with urgent purpose. Conversations were quieter and more serious than usual. Even the Krillian cadets, who typically treated everything as an opportunity to demonstrate their warrior culture, seemed subdued. The auditorium filled quickly as 3,000 cadets took their assigned seats. Commander Veltar took the stage again, but this time he was joined by instructors from all the major species represented at the Academy. Their collective presence suggested that whatever was happening required input from multiple forms of expertise. 47 Minutes ago, we received a distress signal from the civilian transport New Horizon, Commander Veltar began. The ship suffered catastrophic engine failure while carrying colonist families to the Kepler settlement. They are currently drifting toward the gravity well of the dead star in the Helios system. The main display screen showed a tactical overview of the situation. The New Horizon appeared as a small green dot slowly moving toward a much larger red circle that represented the point of no return around the dead star. Numbers at the bottom of the screen showed time remaining, 17 hours and 13 minutes. The ship carries 812 souls, Commander Veltar continued. This includes 427 adults, 155 teenagers, and 230 children under the age of 16. A murmur went through the auditorium as cadets began to understand the scope of the emergency. 800 people was a significant number, but the mention of children seemed to add weight to the situation. Different species had different approaches to reproduction and child-rearing, but most recognized that the loss of young members represented a serious blow to any population. Commander Krelson of the Krillian instructors stepped forward. His massive frame and natural armor made him an intimidating presence even among other instructors. When he spoke, his deep voice carried the authority of a species that had been warriors for thousands of years. Standard rescue protocols require deployment of heavy military vessels, Commander Krelson explained. However, the New Horizon's position near the Helios border creates political complications. The Sovereignty Alliance has declared that sector a contested zone. Any large military presence could be interpreted as an act of aggression. The implications of this statement were clear to most cadets. The galaxy was currently in a state of tense peace between multiple alliance systems. A rescue mission that triggered a military confrontation could lead to war on a scale that would make the loss of one civilian transport seem insignificant. By comparison, Instructor Thexrin of the Vexery took over the briefing. Her species was known for rapid analysis and efficient decision-making, qualities that made them excellent at crisis management. Academy training vessels are too small for ISS evacuation, Thexron stated. The largest ships in our fleet can carry a maximum of 40 passengers under emergency conditions. Private rescue vessels lack the speed to reach the New Horizon before it crosses the point of no return. More numbers appeared on the display screen. Calculations showing the payload capacity of available ships, travel times, fuel requirements, and passenger limits. The mathematics were stark and unforgiving. There was no conventional solution that could save everyone aboard the New Horizon. High Command is developing response options, Commander Veltar said, but the reality is that we may be facing a triage situation. Priority will be given to saving the maximum number of lives possible under the circumstances. The word triage hung in the air like a weight. Every cadet in the auditorium understood what it meant. Some people would be saved and others would not. Decisions would be made about who deserved rescue based on calculations of value, productivity, and social utility. Around the auditorium, different species began discussing the situation in ways that reflected their cultural values. The Krillian cadets spoke in practical terms about preserving the strongest and most capable survivors. The Thornery cadets analyzed the genetic diversity represented by different family groups and calculated which combinations would be most valuable for the colony's long-term survival. The Vexery cadets focused on efficiency, discussing how to maximize the number of people saved per unit of resource expenditure. They talked about optimal passenger loading, fuel consumption ratios, and the logical prioritization of adults over children since adults represented completed investments in training and education, but something was happening at the table where the three human cadets sat. Park Ji-won had stopped listening to the tactical discussions around him. His attention was fixed on one specific number on the display screen, 230 children under age 16. Kim Tae-yun was staring at the same figure, his normally pale complexion even whiter than usual. His hands, which usually moved with nervous energy, were completely still as he processed what he was seeing. Lee Summon's tactical mind was working, but not in the way her instructors had taught her. She was not calculating resource allocation or analyzing survival probabilities based on adult productivity. She was thinking about 230 children who were going to die because the adults around them had decided that saving everyone was impossible. "There has to be something we can do," Park Ji-won said quietly. The Vexery cadet, who had mocked human weakness for months, overheard the comment and turned around with an expression of dismissive amusement. "What exactly do you think 3 weak humans can accomplish that entire military commands cannot?" Vexal asked. "Your species cannot even handle basic physical training without requiring rest periods." Mordok, the massive Krillian cadet, added his own observation in his characteristic rumbling voice. "Humans are adequate for support roles," Mordok said, "but this situation requires warrior capabilities beyond your biological limitations." Other alien cadets nodded in agreement. The humans were known for their persistence and their occasional creative thinking, but this was a crisis that demanded physical capabilities, technological resources, and strategic expertise that humans simply did not possess. But as the briefing continued, and instructors began outlining the grim realities of partial rescue operations, something was changing in the 3 human cadets. Park Ji-won's hands, which usually shook slightly during stressful situations, were becoming steady. Kim Tae-yeon's nervous fidgeting was replaced by an unusual calm. Lee Se-min's tactical analysis was shifting into a mode that none of her instructors had ever seen. The display screen updated with new information: projected rescue scenarios, casualty estimates, and resource allocation charts. The numbers told a story that every cadet could understand, at best. Maybe half the people on the New Horizon could be saved. For most species in the auditorium, this was a regrettable but acceptable outcome. Saving 400 lives was better than saving none. The loss of the others, including most of the children, was unfortunate but necessary given the limitations of available resources. But the 3 humans were not thinking like most species. As alien cadets around them discussed the practical aspects of triage and resource management, Park Ji-won, Kim Tae-yeon, and Lee Se-min were focused on a different question entirely: not how to save the maximum number of people possible, how to save them all. Especially the children. The Academy's tactical planning room buzzed with urgent conversations as cadets from different species worked in groups to analyze the New Horizon crisis. Large holographic displays showed ship positions, fuel calculations, and rescue scenarios that all led to the same conclusion: saving everyone was impossible. At one table, Krillian cadets discussed which adults would be most valuable to preserve. Their warrior culture emphasized saving the strongest and most capable individuals who could contribute to rebuilding the colony. Children, while important for future generations, were considered incomplete investments until they reached maturity. The Thornery cadets sat at another table, their enhanced minds processing genetic data and population dynamics. They calculated which family groups would provide the best diversity for long-term colony survival. Their logical approach treated the rescue as an optimization problem with clear mathematical solutions. The Vexery cadets moved quickly between different workstations, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to process multiple scenarios simultaneously. They focused on efficiency metrics: how many lives could be saved per unit of fuel, per hour of time, per ship deployed. Their analysis consistently showed that prioritizing adults over children yielded better resource utilization. But in a quiet corner of the room, 3 human cadets huddled around a small display screen with a completely different focus. Park Ji-won had pulled up the technical specifications of the Academy's training vessels. Kim Tae-yeon was running communication range calculations. Lee Se-min was studying the orbital mechanics of the dead star system. None of them were discussing which people to save or how to maximize survival rates. They were planning something that the alien cadets would have dismissed as impossible if they had been listening. "The training ships have basic life support for 12 hours maximum," Park Ji-won said quietly, his finger tracing power consumption charts. "But if we strip out non-essential systems and cannibalize parts from multiple vessels, we could extend that to maybe 20 hours. Kim Tae-yeon nodded, his attention focused on communication relay possibilities. The Academy's training network has enough processing power to handle complex navigation calculations if we can convince the AI systems to loan us computing time. The problem is maintaining contact through the solar interference near the dead star. Lee Soman was drawing diagrams on a portable tablet, sketching out ship movements and timing sequences. If we use microjumps instead of continuous flight, we can create a relay chain. Small ships moving children from the new horizon to safety while staying within communication range of each other. Their conversation was interrupted when Thexal of the Vexery approached their table. His elongated limbs and enhanced nervous system made his movements seem unnaturally smooth as he looked over their work with obvious amusement. "What are you humans attempting to accomplish?" Thexal asked, his voice carrying the tone someone might use when addressing small children playing with toys. Park Ji-won looked up from the technical specifications. "We're working on a way to save everyone on the new horizon." The statement caused several nearby alien cadets to stop their own conversations and turn toward the human table. Morduk, the massive Krillian, approached with heavy footsteps that vibrated through the floor. "Save everyone?" Morduk rumbled in his deep voice. "The instructors have already explained why that is impossible. The mathematics are clear." Lee So-min turned her tablet around so the aliens could see her sketches. "We're not using the same approach as the standard rescue protocols. Instead of trying to evacuate everyone with large ships, we use the Academy's training vessels in coordinated micro jumps to create a human chain." More alien cadets gathered around their table as word spread that the humans were proposing an alternative plan. Vexren, a Thornery cadet with particularly advanced analytical abilities, studied Lee Summons diagrams with his large black eyes. "This plan requires impossible precision," Vexren stated. "The timing margins are too narrow. The fuel calculations do not account for the additional energy required for multiple microjumps. Most critically, the radiation exposure near the dead star would be fatal to most species." Kim Tae-yun pulled up his communication analysis on a larger display so everyone could see. "The microjumps keep each ship within communication range of the next vessel in the chain. We maintain constant contact and coordinate movements in real time. The radiation exposure is manageable if we limit individual ship exposure time." Lexal's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. "Manageable? The radiation levels near that dead star would kill a Vexery in less than 4 hours. Humans are even more fragile than my species." "We know," Park Ji-won said simply. The alien cadets exchanged glances. There was something in the human cadets' tone that they had never heard before. Not the nervous uncertainty that usually characterized human responses to challenges, but a quiet certainty that seemed completely at odds with the impossible nature of what they were proposing. Commander Veltar had been moving between the different cadet groups, observing their analysis and discussions. He approached the human table just as Lee So-min was explaining the most dangerous aspect of their plan. The training ships would need to remain in the high radiation zone for approximately 6 hours each, Lee So-min said. "Long enough to load children from the new horizon, make the micro jump to the next ship in the relay chain, transfer the passengers, and return for another group." Commander Veltar's purple skin seemed to darken as he processed what he was hearing. "Cadet Lee, the radiation exposure you are describing would cause permanent biological damage to most species. For humans, it would likely be fatal." "Yes, sir," Lee So-min replied. "And you are proposing this plan anyway?" "Yes, sir." The Thornery commander's enhanced brain could analyze thousands of variables simultaneously, but he found himself unable to understand the logic behind the human response. The plan was technically possible, but only if the operators were willing to sacrifice their own lives to implement it. Mordek leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human table. "You would die to save strangers? People you have never met?" Park Ji-won looked up at the towering Krillian. 230 of them are children. "Children who are not your offspring," Vexal pointed out. "Your species has no genetic obligation to preserve them." The resource cost of this rescue plan far exceeds any logical benefit. Kim Tae-yun's usually nervous demeanor had been replaced by something that the alien cadets found unsettling. His voice was calm and steady as he responded. It's not about genetic obligation or resource costs. Then what is it about? Demanded Thexrin, his enhanced thornery intellect struggling to find a logical framework for human behavior. The three humans looked at each other, and something passed between them that required no words. An understanding that transcended the careful analysis and strategic thinking that dominated their academy training. It's about doing what's right, Lee So-min said finally. The alien cadets around their table fell silent. The concept of right was not unknown to their species, but their definitions were based on logical frameworks: genetic preservation, resource optimization, strategic advantage, cultural benefit. The idea of sacrificing certain survival for uncertain benefit to unrelated individuals was outside their experience. Commander Veltar studied the human cadets with new attention. In his years at the academy, he had observed hundreds of species and thousands of individual students. He had seen bravery, dedication, and sacrifice in service of logical goals. But he had never encountered this particular combination of determination and apparent disregard for personal survival. Even if your plan were technically feasible, Commander Veltar said carefully, it would require authorization from high command. The Academy cannot risk student lives on unauthorized rescue missions. Park Ji-won was already standing up from the table, his movements more decisive than the alien cadets had ever seen from a human. With respect, Commander, we're not asking for authorization. Kim Tae-yun and Lee So-min stood as well, their tablets and technical specifications gathered in their arms. Around them, alien cadets who had spent months mocking human weakness found themselves taking involuntary steps backward. What are you saying? Commander Veltar asked, though his enhanced thornery intellect was already calculating the possibilities. We're saying that 230 children don't have time to wait for authorization, Lee So-min replied. The New Horizon has less than 14 hours before it crosses the point of no return. The three humans walked toward the exit of the tactical planning room, leaving behind a group of alien cadets who were experiencing something completely new in their understanding of human behavior. They had observed human stubbornness, human persistence, and human creativity. But they had never seen humans display the kind of quiet determination that completely ignored personal survival in favor of protecting others. The exile of the Vexery, whose species prided itself on rapid decision-making and efficient analysis, found himself unable to process what he had just witnessed. They cannot be serious. No rational being would attempt such a plan. The exile of the Vexery, whose species prided itself on rapid decision-making and efficient analysis, found himself unable to process what he had just witnessed. They cannot be serious. No rational being would attempt such a plan. Morduk of the Krillians, whose warrior culture celebrated strength and courage in battle, struggled to understand courage that was not directed toward defeating enemies or gaining honor. They speak of dying for strangers as if it were a simple choice. But it was Thexrin of the Thornery who voiced the question that was troubling all the alien cadets. His enhanced intellect could analyze the human plan from every angle, could calculate the precise odds of success and failure, could predict the most likely outcomes. What he could not understand was why anyone would willingly choose certain death, for such a small chance of saving people they had never met. What kind of species, Thexron asked quietly, considers the lives of unknown children more important than their own survival? None of the alien cadets had an answer. In another part of the academy, 3 human cadets were already beginning to modify training vessels for a mission that everyone else considered impossible. The academy's hangar bay was supposed to be locked down during emergency protocols, but Park Ji-won had spent 3 months learning the maintenance systems of every piece of equipment in the facility. His hands moved quickly over the security panel, bypassing locks that were designed to keep unauthorized personnel away from the training vessels. Kim Tae-yun worked at a communication console, his fingers dancing across holographic controls as he convinced the Academy's AI systems to loan him processing power for navigation calculations. The artificial intelligence questioned his authorization, but Taiyun had discovered that human persistence could sometimes wear down even computer logic. Soman stood before 3 small training ships that had been modified in ways that would horrify their designers. Life support systems had been stripped from 2 vessels and installed in the 3rd. Navigation computers had been rewired to handle microjump, calculations that pushed the ships far beyond their intended capabilities. Radiation shielding had been reinforced with materials taken from the Academy's emergency supplies. The modifications were ugly, dangerous, and completely against every safety protocol in the Academy manual. They were also the only chance to save 230 children. How long do we have? Lee So-min asked as she checked the fuel levels in the modified ships. Kim Tae-yun looked up from his calculations. 11 hours and 47 minutes before the New Horizon crosses the point of no return. Travel time to reach them is 3 hours and 12 minutes. Park Ji-won finished his work on the security systems and moved to help with the final equipment checks. His hands were steady now, steadier than they had ever been during normal academy training. The nervous energy that usually made him shake during stressful situations had been replaced by something else entirely. The communication relay network is established, Kim Tae-yun reported. I've created a chain of signal boosters that will let us maintain contact even through the solar interference near the dead star. The hangar bay doors were sealed, but that would not stop them for long. Park Ji-won had already identified the manual override controls. Once they launched, there would be no turning back. The Academy would know what they were doing, but it would be too late to stop them. Are we really going to do this? Kim Tae-yun asked quietly. Lee So-min looked at her 2 friends. 3 months ago, they had been the weakest cadets in their class, struggling to keep up with alien students who possessed natural advantages that humans could never match. Now they were about to attempt something that even the strongest species in the galaxy considered impossible. 230 children. Lee So-min said simply. That was all the answer any of them needed. The 3 modified training ships launched from Nexus Prime Academy without authorization, without backup, and without any realistic chance of all 3 pilots surviving the mission. Academy sensors detected their departure immediately, but by the time Commander Veltar reached the hangar bay, the humans were already beyond recall range. The journey to the New Horizon took exactly 3 hours and 12 minutes, just as Kim Tae-yun had calculated. But those 3 hours were unlike anything the alien cadets back at the Academy had ever witnessed. They watched through Academy sensors as the human pilots pushed their modified ships through space at speeds that should have torn the small vessels apart. Park Ji-won flew his ship with manual controls when the automated systems failed under the stress. Kim Tae-yun maintained communication links through solar interference that should have made contact impossible. Lee So-min coordinated their movements with split-second precision while her navigation computer overheated and began to malfunction. This is not possible, Vexal of the Vexery whispered as he watched the displays in the Academy's main control room. Those ships should have suffered structural failure an hour ago. Commander Veltar studied the sensor readings with growing amazement. The human pilots were not just surviving conditions that would have killed most species. They were performing at levels that exceeded their normal capabilities by factors that his enhanced thornery brain could not calculate. When the 3 ships reached the New Horizon, the real test began. The civilian transport was a massive vessel, designed to carry colonist families in relative comfort. It was never meant to transfer passengers to tiny training ships in the middle of a radiation storm near a dead star. Park Ji-won docked his ship with the New Horizon's emergency airlock and immediately began evacuating children. The first group was 12 kids between ages 6 and 14, all of them terrified and confused. He spoke to them in the calm voice that humans seem to use instinctively when dealing with frightened young people. "We're going to get you home," Park Ji-won told them as he helped them into the cramped passenger compartment of his modified ship. "It might be scary for a little while, but you're going to be safe." The radiation alarms in his cockpit were screaming warnings that he ignored. His ship's hull temperature was climbing to dangerous levels. The life support systems were already showing stress indicators that meant they would fail within hours. Park Ji-won launched from the New Horizon and made the first micro-jump to Kim Tae-yeon's position. The transfer of children from one ship to another took precious minutes while both vessels absorbed lethal doses of radiation. Kim Tae-yeon's nose was already bleeding from the neural strain of maintaining communication through the electromagnetic chaos around the dead star. 12 passengers transferred, Kim Tae-yeon reported through the communication link. Proceeding to next relay point. While Kim Tae-yeon carried the first group of children toward safety, Park Ji-won returned to the New Horizon for the second group. Lee So-min had positioned herself at the midpoint of the rescue chain, coordinating movements and making split-second decisions as conditions changed. The alien cadets watching from the academy saw something that challenged everything they thought they knew about human limitations. As the hours passed and radiation exposure mounted, the human pilots should have lost consciousness. Their equipment should have failed. Their ship should have become drifting hulks. Instead, Park Ji-won continued making trips between the New Horizon and the relay points. His hands were blistered from manual controls that were literally too hot to touch safely, but he kept flying. Kim Tae-yeon maintained communication links while blood ran from his nose and ears, but he kept talking. Lee So-min calculated jump coordinates in her head when her navigation systems failed from heat damage, but she kept coordinating. How are they still functioning? Mordek asked in his deep Krillian voice. My species can endure physical damage. That would kill most beings, but this is beyond biological possibility. Commander Veltar was asking himself the same question. His enhanced Thornery intellect could analyze the medical data streaming from the human ships. Park Ji-won's heart rate was at levels that should have caused cardiac failure. Kim Tae-yeon's brain activity showed patterns consistent with severe neural trauma. Lee So-min's body temperature had climbed to a point where most species would have died from hyperthermia, but they were not just surviving. They were continuing to function at peak performance levels while their bodies absorbed punishment that would have incapacitated trained warriors. After 6 hours of continuous rescue operations, 187 children had been evacuated from the New Horizon. Park Ji-won's ship was barely holding together, its hull cracked and its life support systems running on emergency power. Kim Tae-yeon could no longer see clearly through the blood in his eyes, but his hands continued to work the communication controls with muscle memory. Lee So-min's tactical displays had failed completely, forcing her to coordinate the final rescue runs through voice commands alone. 43 children remaining, Lee So-min reported through the static-filled communication link. New Horizon has less than 2 hours before point of no return. Park Ji-won's response came through a speaker system that was crackling from heat damage. Understood, making final approaches now. The alien cadets watching from the academy were silent. They had spent months mocking human weakness, laughing at the limitations that made humans inferior to every other species in measurable ways. But they were witnessing something that their superior strength, speed, and intelligence could not explain. When humans fought to protect children, their bodies seemed to ignore damage that would stop any other species. Their minds continued to function under stress that would break enhanced alien intellects. Their determination transcended the biological limitations that should have made their mission impossible. The last group of children was transferred from the New Horizon with 37 minutes to spare before the transport crossed the point of no return. All 230 young passengers had been evacuated successfully, but when the final micro-jump was completed and the last child was delivered to safety, all 3 human pilots were unconscious at their controls. Their ships were drifting hulks with failed life support and compromised hull. Integrity. By every medical standard known to galactic science, Park Ji-won, Kim Tae-yeon, and Lee So-min should have been dead hours earlier. Instead, they had saved every single child aboard the New Horizon while their alien classmates watched in stunned silence. The medical bay at Nexus Prime Academy had never seen anything like the 3 unconscious humans lying in its emergency treatment pods. Dr. Catherine of the Thornery. Medical staff moved between the beds with growing fascination, his enhanced intellect. Struggling to understand what his instruments were telling him, Park Ji-won's body showed radiation exposure levels that should have been fatal 6 hours ago. His hands were severely burned from touching superheated metal controls, and his cardiovascular system had been pushed far beyond normal human limits. Yet his vital signs were stabilizing and his cellular regeneration was proceeding at a rate that defied medical explanation. Kim Taeyeon's neural activity readings were equally impossible. The strain of maintaining communication links through electromagnetic interference had caused bleeding in his brain that would have left most species permanently disabled. But his brainwave patterns were returning to normal ranges, and preliminary scans showed no signs of lasting damage. Lee Summons' case was perhaps the most remarkable. Her body temperature had reached levels that should have caused complete organ failure, and she had absorbed enough radiation to kill 3 average humans. However, her recovery rate was so rapid that Dr. Catherine had recalibrated his instruments twice to make sure they were working correctly. Word of the impossible rescue had spread throughout the academy, and cadets from all 12 species had gathered in the medical bay waiting area. The same alien students who had spent months mocking human weakness now stood in quiet groups, trying to understand what they had witnessed. Dexal of the Vexery paced nervously near the medical bay entrance. His species prided itself on efficient analysis and logical decision-making, but the events of the past 18 hours challenged every framework he used to understand the galaxy. "It makes no sense," Dexal said to the other cadets. "Humans are weak. We have measured their strength, their speed, their endurance. They rank at the bottom of every physical capability assessment." Morduk of the Krillians stood motionless in the corner, his massive frame somehow seeming smaller than usual. His warrior culture had taught him to respect strength and courage, but he had never encountered the type of power that allowed beings to transcend their own biological limitations. "I have seen Krillian warriors fight through injuries that would kill most species," Morduk said in his deep voice. "But what those humans did was different. They did not fight through pain and damage. They ignored it completely." Dr. Kethron emerged from the medical bay and approached the gathered cadets. His purple skin had a slight luminescence that indicated deep thought in thornery physiology. As the head of medical research at the academy, he had studied the biology of dozens of species, but his current findings challenged everything he thought he knew about physical limitations. "I have completed preliminary analysis of the human pilots," Dr. Kethron announced. "What I have discovered requires me to revise fundamental assumptions about human biology." The alien cadets gathered closer, eager to understand how 3 of the weakest members of their class had accomplished something that none of them could have survived. Human biology includes emergency response systems that activate under extreme stress, Dr. Kethron explained. When humans perceive that their offspring are in danger, their bodies can override normal safety limitations. Pain receptors partially shut down. Adrenaline production increases beyond sustainable levels. The rational mind, which usually prevents self-destructive behavior, becomes secondary to the protection of young. Vexrin of the Thornery, whose enhanced intellect made him one of the best students at the academy, raised a question that had been troubling many of the alien cadets. But the children on the New Horizon were not their genetic offspring, Vexrin pointed out. Human biology should not respond to unrelated young the same way it responds to direct descendants. Dr. Kethron's large black eyes reflected something that might have been wonder. That is what makes human psychology unique among known species. Their protective instincts extend beyond genetic relationships. They respond to any young of their species as if those children were their own offspring. The implications of this statement sent murmurs through the group of alien cadets. Most species had protective instincts, but those instincts were carefully limited to direct family groups or genetic communities. The idea of risking everything to protect complete strangers was outside their evolutionary experience. Furthermore, Dr. Kethron continued, the medical data shows that the human pilots maintained peak performance levels long after their bodies should have shut down. This suggests that human determination can override biological limitations. When motivated by child protection, Commander Veltar arrived at the medical bay as Dr. Kethron was explaining his findings. The Thornery commander had spent the past 18 hours analyzing Academy sensor data, trying to understand how 3 modified training ships had accomplished what military planners had deemed impossible. The tactical analysis is equally remarkable, Commander Veltar added. The human pilots demonstrated precision and coordination under conditions that should have made rational thought impossible. Their ship handling exceeded the capabilities of their equipment and their own training. As if summoned by the discussion of their impossible feat, the 3 human pilots began to regain consciousness. Park Ji-won was the first to wake, his eyes opening slowly as he tried to focus on the medical bay ceiling. His first words were not about his own condition or his injuries. "Did we get all the children?" Park Ji-won asked weakly. Dr. Kethron leaned over the medical bed with instruments that monitored brain activity and stress responses. All 230 young passengers were successfully evacuated from the New Horizon. "You saved every child aboard the transport." Park Ji-won closed his eyes and smiled, even though the movement clearly caused him pain. His vital signs on the medical monitors showed immediate relaxation, as if the confirmation of the children's safety was more important than his own recovery. Kim Tae-yun woke next, his first attempt to speak producing only a hoarse whisper. When Dr. Kethron helped him sit up, his first question was identical to Park Ji-won's. "The children, are they safe?" "All safe," Dr. Kethron confirmed. "Your communication coordination ensured that every transfer was completed successfully." Kim Tae-yun nodded and lay back down, his body visibly relaxing despite the obvious pain from his injuries. Like Park Ji-won, his primary concern had not been his own survival but the welfare of young people he had never met. Lee So-min was the last to regain consciousness, and her recovery followed the same pattern. Her first words were about the children, not herself. When she learned that the rescue had been completely successful, her body seemed to release tension that had been holding her together. Through willpower alone, the alien cadets who had gathered to witness the humans' recovery found themselves observing something that challenged their understanding of rational behavior. The 3 pilots had risked certain death to save strangers, and their primary satisfaction came from the success of that mission rather than their own survival. Vexal approached Park Ji-won's medical bed with visible confusion. "Why did you do it? Those children were not your responsibility. They shared no genetic connection to your family line. The logical response would have been to accept partial losses and preserve yourselves for future missions." Park Ji-won looked at the Vexery cadet with an expression that was patient but firm. "They were children. That made them our responsibility?" The simplicity of the answer frustrated Vexal, whose species valued complex analysis and efficient solutions. "But the resource cost was enormous. You nearly died to save individuals who contribute nothing to your personal survival or genetic success." "That's not how it works," Kim Tae-yun said from his own medical bed. "When children are in danger, humans don't calculate costs and benefits, we just act." Mordek stepped forward, his massive Krillian frame casting a shadow over the medical beds. "My people understand courage in battle and sacrifice for honor. But you fought against impossible odds for beings you had never met. What honor did you gain from this action?" Lee So-min struggled to sit up despite Dr. Kethron's protests about her need for rest. It wasn't about honor or genetic survival or resource costs. It was about doing what was right. "But what makes it right?" Vexren demanded, his enhanced Thornery intellect searching for a logical framework that could explain human behavior. "Your action provided no evolutionary advantage. It served no strategic purpose. It benefited individuals outside your genetic group." The 3 humans exchanged glances, and the alien cadets saw the same wordless understanding that had passed between them when they first decided to attempt the impossible rescue. "Because they were children," all 3 humans said almost simultaneously. Dr. Kethron, who had been quietly monitoring the conversation while checking medical readings, finally spoke up with the authority of someone who had spent years studying different species. What you are witnessing, Dr. Kethron told the alien cadets, is a form of strength that we had classified as weakness. Human protective instincts are not limited by genetic relationships or logical calculations. When young are threatened, adult humans will sacrifice everything to protect them, even young that are not their own offspring. The alien cadets stood in silence, processing this information. They had spent months observing human limitations, the need for more sleep, the slower reflexes, the weaker physical capabilities, but they had missed the significance of the one area where humans exceeded every other known species. When it came to protecting children, humans became capable of transcending every biological limitation that normally defined their species. And that capability was not based on superior technology, enhanced genetics, or advanced training. It was based on something much simpler and much more powerful: love. 6 months had passed since the rescue of the New Horizon, and the Galactic Military Academy felt like a different place. The same corridor still echoed with the sounds of cadets from 12 species moving between training sessions, but the conversations had changed in ways that surprised even the instructors. In the mess hall, where alien cadets had once gathered to mock human weaknesses, the discussions now included respectful questions about human psychology and protective instincts. The rescue mission had become required study material in tactical courses, not because of the innovative ship modifications or communication techniques, but because it demonstrated capabilities that military planners had never considered. Park Ji-won sat at his usual table with Kim Tae-yeon and Lee So-min, eating the same protein paste and vitamin supplements that passed for human food in space. But the other cadets no longer saw them as the weakest members of their class. The three humans had become something unique in the Academy's history: students who were simultaneously physically inferior to their classmates and universally respected by them. The exile of the Vexery approached their table, but his demeanor was completely different from the mocking arrogance he had displayed months earlier. He moved carefully, as if he were approaching beings whose capabilities he could not fully understand. "May I join you?" The exile asked politely. Park Ji-won gestured to an empty seat. "Of course." The Vexery cadet sat down and placed his own food tray on the table. For several moments, he seemed to struggle with how to begin the conversation he wanted to have. "I have been studying the tactical reports from your rescue mission," the exile finally said. "My instructors have asked me to analyze what made your approach successful when conventional methods would have failed." Kim Tae-yeon looked up from his food. "What did you conclude?" "That is the problem," the exile admitted. "Every analysis I perform reaches the same result. Your mission should have been impossible. The resource costs were too high, the risks were too great, and the chances of success were statistically insignificant." Lee So-min smiled slightly. "But we succeeded anyway." "Yes," the exile said, and his voice carried a note of wonder that was unusual for his efficiency-focused species. "You succeeded because you were not thinking like military tacticians or resource managers. You were thinking like parents." The observation was accurate, and it had become the central focus of new training protocols throughout the Academy. Instructors from multiple species were studying human psychology to understand how parental instincts could override logical limitations and produce capabilities that exceeded normal biological boundaries. Mordek approached their table with his characteristic heavy footsteps, but like the exile, his attitude toward the humans had undergone a complete transformation. The massive Krillian cadet who had once dismissed humans as weak now treated them with the respect that his warrior culture reserved for proven fighters. "The Krillian Council has requested detailed reports about human combat psychology," Mordek announced as he sat down. "My people want to understand how warriors can fight beyond their physical limitations when motivated by protection of young." "We're not warriors," Park Ji-won pointed out. "We're just people who couldn't let children die." "That distinction," Mordek replied, "is what makes your species remarkable." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Veltar. whose purple thornery features showed the slight luminescence that indicated deep contemplation. The Academy's senior tactical instructor had been spending considerable time studying the philosophical implications of the human rescue mission. "Cadets," Commander Veltar said, "I wanted to inform you that your actions have influenced military doctrine throughout the Galactic Alliance. Emergency rescue protocols are being revised to account for human psychological capabilities." The three humans exchanged glances. They had never intended to change military policy or influence galactic thinking about rescue operations. They had simply done what felt necessary when children were in danger. "What kind of changes?" Lee Salman asked. "Human personnel are now considered essential for any mission involving civilian evacuation, particularly when families with children are involved," Commander Veltar explained. "Military planners have recognized that human motivation can overcome resource limitations that would stop other species." Kim Tae-yun frowned slightly. "We don't want to be seen as expendable because we're willing to take risks that other species won't accept." Commander Veltar's large black eyes showed understanding. "That is precisely why the new protocols emphasize human capabilities rather than human expendability. Your species possesses a form of strength that cannot be replicated by superior technology or enhanced biology." Over the following weeks, the three human cadets found themselves at the center of a cultural shift that extended far beyond the Academy. Representatives from multiple species arrived to study human psychology and observe how protective instincts influence behavior under extreme stress. Dr. Kethran published research papers that revolutionized galactic understanding of biological limitations and psychological motivation. His work demonstrated that most species had been analyzing strength incorrectly, focusing on measurable physical capabilities while ignoring the power of emotional commitment. The Vexari, whose culture emphasized efficiency and resource optimization, began incorporating human decision-making models into their strategic planning. They discovered that solutions based on emotional rather than logical motivation sometimes produced better outcomes than pure efficiency calculations. The Krillians, whose warrior traditions celebrated individual strength and combat prowess, developed new training methods that emphasized protective instincts as a source of enhanced performance. Their military academies began teaching that the strongest warriors were those who fought to protect others rather than to gain personal glory. The Thornery, whose enhanced intellects had always relied on logical analysis and calculated decision-making, started studying the effectiveness of intuitive responses in crisis situations. They found that human-style emotional reasoning could solve problems that defeated even their advanced mental capabilities, but perhaps the most significant change occurred in how the alien species viewed their own relationships with their young. Many galactic cultures had treated reproduction and child-rearing as resource management problems, optimizing genetic outcomes and educational investments for maximum cultural benefit. Observing human parental instincts led several species to reconsider whether they had been missing something important about the value of emotional bonds between generations. Some alien families began spending more time with their offspring, not because it was efficient or logical, but because the human example suggested that such connections might be a source of strength rather than a resource drain. Park Ji-won, Kim Tae-yun, and Lee Salman completed their academy training with distinction, though their final evaluations included categories that had never existed before. Their physical capabilities remained at the bottom of their class rankings, but they scored at the top in new assessments of crisis motivation, protective instinct activation, and willingness to exceed biological limitations for mission success. Upon graduation, all three were assigned to specialized units focused on civilian protection and emergency rescue operations. Their first mission briefings included a new type of scenario planning that accounted for human psychological advantages in situations involving families and children. Park Ji-won became a senior engineer in the Galactic Emergency Response Division, where his modifications to rescue equipment were based on the principle that human operators might need to function beyond normal safety parameters when children were at risk. Kim Tae-yun joined the Crisis Communication Corps, where his ability to maintain contact under impossible conditions made him the preferred coordinator for evacuation missions involving young passengers. Lee Soman accepted a position with the Civilian Protection Command, where her tactical expertise was combined with protocols that recognized human decision-making as a strategic advantage in scenarios where logical analysis reached unacceptable conclusions. On their final day at the academy, the three friends stood in the hangar bay where they had once modified training ships for an impossible mission. The bay now contained emergency rescue vessels designed with human psychological capabilities in mind, ships that could be operated by personnel who might need to ignore their own survival instincts to protect others. "Do you think we changed? Anything important?" Kim Tae-yeon asked as they looked at the new rescue ships. Lee Soman considered the question. Around them, alien cadets and human cadets worked together on projects that would have been unimaginable before the New Horizon rescue. The mockery and dismissal that had once characterized interactions between species had been replaced by mutual respect and recognition of different forms of strength. "We showed them that weakness and strength aren't always what they seem," Lee Soman replied. "Sometimes the beings who look weakest turn out to be capable of things that the strongest can't imagine." Park Ji-won nodded toward a group of mixed-species cadets who were collaborating on a new rescue protocol design. "The real change isn't what they think about humans. It's what they're learning about themselves." The three humans left Nexus Prime Academy as graduates, but their influence remained in every training program, every tactical manual, and every emergency protocol that now acknowledged a simple truth when it comes to protecting children: there is no such thing as impossible. Throughout the galaxy, no military commander questioned the assignment of human personnel to missions involving families and civilian populations. Not because humans were stronger or faster or more intelligent than other species, but because they possessed something that no amount of armor, plating, enhanced reflexes, or psychic abilities could match. The aliens had learned that when humans fight for their children, biological limitations become irrelevant. And in learning that lesson, they had discovered new possibilities for their own species, their own protective instincts, and their own capacity to transcend the boundaries they had accepted as permanent. The rescue of the New Horizon had saved 230 children, but it had also saved something else: the idea that love could be a form of strength, that no technology could replicate and no evolution could improve. In the end, that was a lesson worth learning, even if it took three small, weak, fragile humans to teach it to the strongest warriors in the galaxy.